All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. It's March 3rd, 2025.
2025 already.
It is.
Wow.
And we're diving into some pretty choppy waters today.
Yeah.
This whole thing with the Trump administration and these tariffs they just dropped on Canada and Mexico.
Yeah. It's a big one.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And we got to unpack it. So just to set the scene.
Okay.
It's March 3rd. Like I said, 2025. This news is, sending shockwaves through the markets, political landscapes.
Yeah, big time.
So, and, when you hear the word tariffs, you don't really think like, oh, this is going to be the most exciting thing I've ever heard.
Right.
But this is something that impacts literally everyone.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to break down exactly how and all the crazy ripple effects that come out of this.
It's a web.
Yeah. So first off, what are we even talking about here with these tariffs?
Yeah. So essentially,
lay it on me.
We're talking 25% on everything. Everything coming in from Canada and Mexico. So that's your cars, your avocados, you name it. Anything you can think of that's coming in from Canada and Mexico is now going to be more expensive.
Wow.
Plus, on top of that, an extra 10% just on Canadian energy.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like an instant price hike on all those imports.
Right.
And it's coming straight out of your pocket. You're going to be the one paying for it.
So that's a big ouch right there.
Yeah.
So what is the reasoning behind this sudden, tariff fest?
Right. So the administration cites concerns over illegal immigration,
Okay.
drug trafficking,
Mm-hmm.
and, of course, a desire to boost American manufacturing.
Okay, so those all sound pretty, straightforward on the surface, but
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
This is where it gets spicy.
Okay, so tell me why it's spicy.
So it's not just about economics, right? It's a power play. It's a way for the U.S. to exert its influence and redefine the dynamics in North America.
Kind of flex their muscles a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah, showing their strength.
So what's been the immediate impact, right off the bat?
Well, the markets are reacting pretty strongly.
Yeah, our sources are saying things like financial shockwaves.
Yeah, stock markets are dipping. Both the Canadian and Mexican currencies are taking a hit.
It's like a domino effect.
Totally.
One thing leads to another and suddenly...
It's a cascade.
It's a cascade.
And, we hear stock market dips and it's easy to tune it out. It's like, that's just numbers on a screen. It doesn't affect me.
Right.
But it actually does. Your retirement funds, your investments, anything you have in the market is potentially being impacted by this.
Right. And it's not just like investors or, people who are really into finance. This is affecting everyday people.
Exactly. Like when these economies start to wobble, that trickles down to jobs, to prices,
right,
to everything.
So corporations, too, are kind of scrambling, trying to figure out, okay, what's our next move? How do we deal with this?
For sure, they're trying to adapt.
Yeah. And we're actually seeing some pretty big moves, like automakers are pulling production out of Mexico.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
To avoid those costs.
It makes sense, right? If it's suddenly more expensive to produce in Mexico, they're going to look for cheaper options.
But then that raises the question, what happens to all those jobs?
Right, both in Mexico and potentially here in the U.S.
So it's like we're trying to protect American manufacturing, but could it actually backfire?
It's a real possibility, and on the energy front, we see Canadian companies scrambling to find new buyers for their oil and gas.
So what does that mean for global energy prices?
Well, if Canada's usual buyers aren't taking their energy, someone else will, but they might demand a higher price.
Right. So we could see a significant increase.
Potentially.
Just from this one seemingly, isolated decision.
Right. But this situation just really underscores how interconnected our world is. What might seem like a targeted action can have ripple effects across the globe.
Okay, so let's talk about the political fallout for a second, because the reaction's been pretty heated, right?
Definitely not everyone's happy about this.
Canada's calling it flat out unacceptable.
Strong words.
Yeah, and Mexico's already planning countermeasures.
So we're starting to see the very real risk of a trade war here.
Oh, boy. Okay, so just to, break it down for people who might not be familiar with all this jargon.
Yeah.
When we say trade war, what exactly are we talking about?
So basically, it's a series of escalating tariffs or other trade barriers between countries.
Okay.
So it's like a back and forth exchange of economic punches. Each country is trying to protect its own industries, but in the process, they're hurting consumers and businesses.
So it's like everyone loses.
Pretty much. Yeah, it rarely works out well for anyone involved.
So what does all this mean for the average person like you and me?
Right.
Who aren't necessarily, CEOs or politicians?
So big picture implications are pretty significant. We're talking about disrupted supply chains, especially for industries like the automotive industry and agriculture.
Right. So these are things that affect, our everyday lives.
Absolutely. This means you're likely going to see higher prices at the car dealership, at the grocery store.
Ooh,
Your wallet is going to feel this one.
ouch.
And when prices go up, that tends to slow down economic growth.
For everyone.
Not just in one country, for all the countries involved.
Yeah, it just makes you realize how interconnected we all are globally.
It really does.
We depend on this complex web of trade and international cooperation.
And when that web gets disrupted, it affects everyone.
So what happens next? Like, what are we looking at moving forward?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Right. And our sources are saying that the next few months are going to be critical.
Yeah, things could go either way right now.
Will cooler heads prevail and we can, come to some sort of agreement? Or are we just going to see this whole spiral of retaliation?
We're at a pivotal moment, that's for sure.
Yeah. So the decisions that are made in these next few months could completely reshape North American trade.
For years to come, potentially.
Yeah. And it could have a lasting impact on our economic stability.
No doubt about it.
So here's a final thought for everyone to consider. We've talked about a lot of the potential negative consequences, but one of the big reasons behind these tariffs is supposedly to protect American jobs.
Right.
But what if it actually ends up having the opposite effect?
That's the real question, isn't it?
What if it actually ends up hurting American workers in the long run?
Something to think about.
Definitely something to keep in mind as this whole situation unfolds and,
Stay tuned. We'll be keeping an eye on it.
We'll be back to keep unpacking this whole mess. So, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.